Hello. Hi. I'm Kevin. We're going to talk about the Carolina Panthers today. I'm not just a tourist. I love the Panthers. So there. So there are some games where a player earns his contract. Chuba Hubbard did this backwards. The Panthers gave him the contract first. 3 days before this game, Carolina signed Hubbard to a 4-year extension. The extension is going to keep him under contract through 2028. And at the time, he was 5th in the NFL with 665 rushing yards, averaging 5 yards a carry with 6 touchdowns. Hubbard said he wanted to be a Panther for life and wanted to help change the culture in Carolina. Then, everybody flew to Germany. And Chuba Hubbard spent Sunday basically saying, see, this is why you paid me. 28 carries, career high 153 yards, and a touchdown. In a Panthers win that somehow became one of the strangest little bright spots of the 2024 season. Carolina arrived in Munich at 2-7. It was Dave Canales' first season as head coach, but this was not a good football team yet. They just beat New Orleans 23-22, snapping a 5-game losing streak. Bryce Young was making his 3rd consecutive start after Andy Dalton had a car accident. The question around Bryce wasn't really whether he'd suddenly become a superstar. It's a much smaller question. Could he keep stacking competent NFL football? Could the Panthers actually build something instead of resetting every Sunday? Across the field, the Giants are also 2-7, and they'd lost 4 straight. Daniel Jones was under enormous scrutiny. Brian DeBall's team was sliding backward, and New York desperately needed this to be the game that stabilized things. And Vegas thought it would be. The Giants were favored by 6.5. The money line was about minus 290. So 2 teams with the exact same record, playing thousands of miles from home, and the market basically said, yeah, but one of these 2 teams is a lot worse. And it wasn't New York. There was a couple obvious pressure points going in. Brian Burns was facing Carolina for the first time since the Panthers traded him to New York. He already had 5 sacks for the Giants, and now he got a shot at the franchise where he'd spent his first 5 seasons. And New York had an extremely obvious offensive plan available. Run the football. Carolina entered the week allowing about 159 rushing yards per game. That was worst in the league. They had 15 rushing touchdowns allowed. Rookie Tyrone Tracy Jr. looked exactly like the kind of back who turned that weakness into the entire game plan. But Carolina had its own answer. Chuba. One of the Panthers' pregame matchup notes pointed out that Hubbard was unusually good at getting through the backfield cleanly, while the Giants had been allowing a lot of rushing yardage before first contact. The challenge in the middle was enormous because Dexter Lawrence was there. But if Carolina could get Hubbard started, maybe the Panthers could play the same game New York wanted to play. Over on the outside, J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson had Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson to deal with, while Darius Slayton didn't even make the trip because he had a concussion. So the expected script was pretty simple. New York pounds Carolina on the ground, Burns and Lawrence make Bryce Young uncomfortable, and the Giants grind out a win. That script survived for 1 quarter. Hubbard's path to being this important to Carolina wasn't particularly obvious when they drafted him. He's from Sherwood Park, Alberta, Canada. He went to Oklahoma State. In 2019, he exploded. 2,094 rushing yards in college, 21 rushing touchdowns, and he led the entire FBS in rushing. He was an All-American and won the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year award. Excuse me. Carolina took him in the 4th round of the 2021 draft with the 126th overall selection. And at first he was a rotational guy behind Christian McCaffrey. Then McCaffrey was gone. Miles Sanders came in. Hubbard kept hanging around. Eventually, he stopped being the guy behind somebody. He just became the guy. That reputation was built as... Hold on. That reputation was built on how he worked as what he did on Sunday. Panther staff and teammates routinely described Hubbard as one of the culture setters in the building. Even in Munich, there was this perfect little Chuba detail. A few hours before kickoff, he wanted his usual pass-catching work. The jugs machine hadn't made the trip from the Bayern Munich practice facility to Allianz Arena, so equipment staffers Mark Whitehurst and Mark Almond just started throwing footballs themselves. Problem solved. That's Chuba Hubbard. Carolina's first possession was nothing special. Hubbard got 5 yards on the first snap, and then Brian Burns immediately got his revenge game moment, dropping Bryce Young for an 8-yard sack. Panthers punted. Okay, maybe this was going to go how everybody expected. Maybe. Except Carolina got the ball back and started from its own 10-yard line. Bryce hit Xavier Legette for 23, then Chuba Hubbard ripped off a 26-yarder around the left side. A couple plays later, he ripped off another 26-yard run. So suddenly, Carolina gone from its own end of the field all the way down to the Giants' 6. Bryce finished the 90-yard drive with a 5-yard touchdown pass to Jatavian Sanders. 7-0 Panthers. Eddie Pinheiro added a 53-yard field goal early in the second quarter, 10-0. And late in the half, with New York finally threatening, Xavier Woods intercepted Daniel Jones. So Carolina goes to halftime leading 10-0. Now, New York wasn't dead. The Giants came out of halftime and finally attacked the weakness everybody expected them to attack. And I can see y'all in here. I can't respond to any of your comments because I'm on a third-party software. So just say nice things, huh? So, okay, Tyrone Tracy broke a 32-yard touchdown run for the Giants, 10-7. And this right here might be the most important sequence in the entire game. Because bad Panthers teams had spent years showing you exactly what usually came next. Something goes wrong, momentum flips, everybody gets tight, collapse. Instead, Carolina took the football and went 80 yards in 10 plays. Hubbard carried for 4, then 5, then 25. Bryce added a 24-yard scramble. Then from the 1-yard line, Carolina gave the ball to Chuba again. Touchdown, 17-7 Panthers. That drive took more than 5 minutes off the clock and immediately answered New York's best punch of the day. But this still wasn't going to be comfortable. Daniel Jones ran for a touchdown in the fourth quarter, 17-14. Then Hubbard had what looked like for a moment like a nightmare play. He was being dragged down from behind. His footing disappeared on the slick field. His knee buckled underneath him, and the football came out. Giants ball in Carolina's territory. Hubbard stayed down. Fortunately, it turned out the slipping might actually have prevented something much worse. He changed cleats and eventually returned to the game, and Carolina's defense bailed him out. Josie Jewell intercepted Daniel Jones at the Panthers' 9, still 17-14. New York got one last chance, though, and Graham Gano kicked a 42-yard field goal with 5 seconds remaining, 17-17. Overtime in Munich, and the Giants won the toss. On their first offensive play, Tyrone Tracy carried up the middle. Ashawn Robinson punched the ball loose. Josie Jewell recovered at the Giants' 23. One play. Just one. That's all New York's overtime possession lasted. And Carolina, to their credit, they decided not to get cute. Hubbard, 1 yard. Hubbard, 2 yards. Hubbard, 2 more yards. 3 straight carries, 5 yards. Center the football, send out Eddie Pinheiro, 36-yard field goal. It's good. Panthers 20, Giants 17. Carolina won consecutive games for the first time. The very first time in Bryce Young's career. And Chuba Hubbard walked out of Munich with 153 rushing yards on 28 carries, plus 4 catches for 16 more. 169 nice yards from scrimmage. That was 3 days after signing this extension. Pretty good timing. Bryce Young said having a back and an offensive line you could lean on was huge. Then he simplified it. Chuba played amazing, as he always does. Dave Canales essentially said the performance didn't surprise him. The consistency, the hard running, the reads, that was the player they'd been watching every day. The Panthers released footage of a fired-up winning locker room afterward, and the whole thing felt bigger than a normal win by a 3-win team. And it wasn't because Carolina suddenly became a contender. They didn't. But they were starting to look like a team that actually enjoyed playing football together. And here's another little Chuba detail. After the team flew back from Germany, the buses got everyone back to the facility at 3 in the morning. Hubbard was one of the first guys back in the building for treatment. Of course he was. For the Giants, this was the opposite. They fell to 2-8. Brian Daboll said the bye week would be used to evaluate everything. Daniel Jones said they needed to figure out what was holding them back. They were right. Their season was falling apart. So the postscript, Carolina didn't suddenly become good after Germany, but it did become competitive. They finished 5-12, including a 4-5 record over the second half of the season. Bryce Young's revival became one of the biggest stories of those final 2 months. Hubbard finished with 1,195 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, and 4.8 yards average per carry. That was his first 1,000-yard season. And the Munich game remained the biggest rushing performance of the year. New York finished 3-14. Yikes. 3 wins, 14 losses. A season that had started with at least some hope ended as one of the worst in Giants history. And here's where I could tell you Hubbard simply took that 2024 season and became Carolina's unquestioned workhorse forever. Except, no, football doesn't work that neatly. Carolina added Rico Dowdle in 2025. And early in the season, Hubbard suffered a calf injury. While Hubbard was out, Dowdle went nuts. Back-to-back games with more than 200 yards from scrimmage. And the Panthers suddenly had a legitimate two-back situation. Hubbard finished 2025 with 511 rushing yards on 134 carries. That's a huge drop from 2024. But here's the weird part. He only scored 1 rushing touchdown. He caught 3. One of those came against the Rams when he took a pass 35 yards for a touchdown during Carolina's 31-28 upset and finished with 124 yards from scrimmage. And the team itself finally took the step everybody had been waiting for. The 2025 Panthers won the NFC South at 8-9, reaching the playoffs for the first time in 8 seasons, before losing a wild card game 34-31 to the Rams. So Hubbard went from carrying a 2-7 football team in Germany to being part of a playoff team just 1 year later. As of August 2026, he's still under that Carolina contract through 2028. So he's currently dealing with a hamstring injury. Dave Canales called it week to week, although the Panthers have expressed confidence about having him available in time for the regular season. Whether he's the lead back, part of a committee, or somewhere in between, the contract they handed Hubbard in Munich doesn't feel like some random decision anymore, because this game showed exactly what Carolina thought it was paying for. Next time, Panther 5 takes us backward to Christmas Eve 2022. Taylor Moton and the Panthers' offensive line had just been embarrassed by Pittsburgh.